friends, welcome one more time to FHP Books. Today I'm going to talk about Scarface, but not only about the most well-known Scarface, which is the movie made 1983 by Brian De Palma starring Al Pacino with script by Oliver Stone. Most of you know this movie. Most of you know this great, amazing movie with Al Pacino in the leading role, Al Pacino with Michelle Pfeiffer. This movie about the rise and fall of Tony Montana, a Cuban refugee in Miami in the beginning of the 80s. But many of you, I'm sure, do not know this other movie. And this is the original Scarface. This is the original Scarface movie from 1932 by Howard Hawks with Paul Mooney in the leading role. And this is the original Scarface movie because this Scarface movie, the Scarface movie of 83, this is actually a remake. It's a remake made more than 50 years later of this original Scarface movie. The original Scarface movie, made 1932, was actually inspired in the life of Al Capone. Al Capone was known as Scarface. Al Capone, his nickname was actually Scarface because he had a scar in his face. Quite logic, isn't it? And then he was known as Scarface, and in the 30s, when he was still alive, because I think he died in the 40s. I forgot the exact year, but he died in the 40s, so 1932 he was still alive, but he was, I think, already in prison because he was very active in the 20s, in the roaring 20s, in the times of the Prohibition. In the times of the Prohibition, Al Capone was the big boss of Chicago. Scarface from 1932 is inspired in his life, but the protagonist is not, his name is not Al Capone or Alphonse Capone. His name of this protagonist is Anthony Camonte. Anthony Camonte is an Italian-American gangster, a fictional Italian-American gangster in Chicago in the 20s that is inspired in the real-life gangster Al Capone. And in this movie, Scarface from 1932, the protagonist, Tony Camonte, is played by actor Paul Mooney. Paul Mooney was an actor that was also very popular in these years, in the 30s, in the 40s. He was starring in a lot of great movies, in a lot of gangster movies, thriller, film noir, and so on. Paul Mooney is more or less in the same level like Edward G. Robinson and other great actors like James Cagney, Humphrey Bogart. And actually, in the beginning of this Scarface of 83, Tony Montana, the Tony Camonte of 50 years later, he says in one of the first scenes when he's been questioned by the police in Miami, he says that he learned English watching movies with Humphrey Bogart and James Cagney and so on, and that's the reason why he is able to speak English so well as a Cuban refugee just arrived to the States. Okay, then back to Scarface 32. Scarface 32 is the story inspired in the life of Al Capone. And Howard Hawks and the scriptwriter, in this story, they took other elements, like for instance the relationship with his sister, the relationship with his best friend, and how he rose to power by overthrowing his former boss. He was a weak guy, and afterwards the protagonist, Tony Camonte, in this movie from the 30s, he rose to power by overthrowing him, and then he took his wife. He took the wife of his boss, and he became the boss. So, and the same parallelisms, the same dynamic, the same story, the same structure of the plot we see in this movie, in the Scarface of '83. Exactly the same plot line, but yeah, as you probably know if you have watched the movie Scarface, he has a particular relationship with his sister. He wants to protect her. He is the oldest brother and he wants to protect his sister, and he's very jealous of his sister meeting with other guys and so on. And yeah, his best friend is also his second right-hand man of Al Pacino, of Tony Montana. We have his friend Manny, and exactly the same dynamic, the same story we see also in the first part, in the original version of Scarface. There is the same structure, the same parallelisms, the same dynamic between the characters. So, but in my opinion, the second movie, this second Scarface, the remake, the second version of Scarface is more interesting because it deepens more in some socio-political context of the time. As we see in the beginning, Tony Montana arrives to Miami as a refugee, as a Cuban refugee, and he arrives in this crisis, popularly known as the crisis of the Marielitos, because they were expelled from the Mariel port in Cuba. As far as I remember, the story goes like this. They were expelled from Mariel to Miami, and Fidel Castro made like a kind of hybrid warfare by expelling a lot of criminals. Many were normal people, many were normal refugees, but among them there were also a lot of criminals, a lot of crazy people to provocate chaos in the United States. So we see this in the beginning, we see this context, this historical context actually. And we also see this relationship between the big drug rings, the big drug organizations, and politics. We see that, for instance, with the relationship of Alejandro Sosa. Alejandro Sosa is the big boss of the narco organization in Bolivia, and Alejandro Sosa has a lot of political contacts in his office. He has a lot of political people, and he is very powerful. He has created a very huge criminal empire that is actually merged with politics in his country in an international way as well. These big socio-political topics, we don't have this in the original Scarface. That's why, in my opinion, the second version of Scarface is more interesting. The scriptwriter of the second version was Oliver Stone. He makes a great version of Scarface in this second version of Scarface from the 80s. And also what I like very, very much of this movie is the soundtrack by Giorgio Moroder, the great musician Giorgio Moroder. He makes an amazing soundtrack of Scarface. And in the first part, we also miss a soundtrack. So that's why, in my opinion, the second version of Scarface is better than the first. But nevertheless, the first version of Scarface is also a very good movie. It's also a very enjoyable movie. It has also some didactic elements because they wanted, the makers of this movie, they wanted to show that crime is not, that it's not worth to commit, because at the end of the day, at the end, you will fail. At the end, justice will prevail. And this is the didactic message of this Scarface from the 30s. So if you want to know more about these movies, if you want to know more in depth, if you want to go more in depth about this, the story, the plots and the connotations and the context, and you want to read a commentary about these movies, then you will find it on my blog, fhpbooks.com. Now I have published the critique, the film review of the original Scarface from the 30s. It's published on my blog, it's published on my website, you can find it there. The review of the second part I haven't published yet, but maybe I will do so in the next days, in the next weeks, in the next months, who knows. But if you want to deepen even more in these stories, in this gangster topic, in these gangster stories, in these gangster movies, then I can recommend you to read my book, Mafia Films: A Guide, which is a compilation of film reviews related to mafia topics. There I have written reviews about the great classics of mafia cinema. So thank you very much for your attention and see you in the next time. Bye!